Hey everyone, welcome back to Masonzero MTG. In this video, I'm going to go through the best cards for Cube from Phyrexia All Will Be One. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of the cards in this set immediately disqualified themselves from this video due to their rather parasitic mechanics, making the list of potential cards quite a bit shorter. First of all, there's the toxic mechanic, which gives poison counters to players. Then all of the cards that just straight up give poison counters to people. And of course the corrupted mechanic that grants extra benefits if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters. These cards are going to synergize nicely in limited, but I can't see many of them making their way into cubes unless you specifically have a poison or infect theme. These cards usually aren't going to win with poison counters on their own in a vacuum. They need that extra support, and a lot of them just aren't good enough on their own to be worth playing in your cube. The same goes for all the cards with oil counters. A lot of them are okay even without additional synergy, but none are instant includes in cube. These cards are also better with other oil counter synergies or with a surplus of proliferate. All these mechanics could be usable and even quite good in a proliferate or counters cube, but for the average cube, which is usually what I try to make these videos about, they just aren't going to cut it. Even the 4 Mirrodin mechanic is not great. In theory it's similar to Living Weapon, but none of the cards with this mechanic are close enough to something like Batterskull in power level. So with all of these parasitic and underwhelming mechanics, we're left with a smaller list of cards that would be good in most cubes, making this one of maybe the less interesting episodes of the series, although I was still able to narrow it down to 10 instead of 5, so hey, maybe there are some good cards in this set. Anyways, let's get into it with Minor Misstep. Minor Misstep is going to be great in formats like Modern and maybe Legacy and Vintage, and the more powerful your cube, the more powerful this card will be. This counters all of the Mox and other fast mana cards like Black Lotus, Mana Crypt, as well as incredibly annoying cards to play against like Esper Sentinel, Ancestral Recall, and Ragavan. But again, to iterate, this shines in powered or just very high power level cubes that play these insane cards. If your cube is lower power, this card is likely far less good. Sword of Forge and Frontier. The swords are of course pretty popular in cube, so it makes sense that the cycle should continue by adding Sword of Forge and Frontier to your list. And even if you're a more casual cuber who maybe doesn't own the other swords but happens to open this in your booster box, it's a good inclusion. On combat damage, you get to exile the top 2 cards of your library and can play an extra land. And that extra land can come from those exiled cards. Not the most powerful sword to ever be printed, but it's 2 very useful effects that should keep you ahead. Kaito Dancing Shadow. The new Kaito Planeswalker card is actually really good. It has some abilities that should be fun in blue-black. He has a unique static ability that says when your creatures hit a player, you can bounce one of them back to your hand, and activate 2 of Kaito's abilities this turn instead of just 1. For abilities, his +1 prevents 1 creature from attacking or blocking, his 0 draws a card, which is always nice, and his -2 creates a token with Death Touch that drains for 2 when it leaves the battlefield. Even with no other cards, you can attack in with a token, bounce it with Kaito's static ability, then draw a card, and freeze an opponent's creature so it can't attack your Planeswalker. Seems good, and it's a nice replacement for the normal milling Planeswalkers we get in blue-black. If I never have to see an Ashiok again, I think I'll die happy. Sheoldred's Edict. Next up is Sheoldred's Edict, which is a sacrifice effect that many people are excited about. Even compared to the long-loved Chainer's Edict, this card is pretty damn good. It allows for a level of selection that is rarely seen in these forced sacrifice cards. You can choose for each opponent to sacrifice a non-token creature, a creature token, or a Planeswalker. This gets around the biggest downside of these types of cards, which is that the opponent can usually just sacrifice a 1/1 token rather than the thing you actually want to kill. Hitting Planeswalkers is also a nice touch, as there will rarely be multiple options. This pretty much just says destroy target Planeswalker. There's also the fact that it's an instant and that it hits each opponent, making this good in multiplayer cubes as well. Easily the best Edict by far, if you compare it to any of the other ones out there. Mondrak Glory Dominus. Mondrak Glory Dominus is going to be a really great cube card because it's basically already proven to be one. The mana value and the text are the exact same as Anointed Procession. It also just happens to be a 4/4 creature. And for 1 and 2 Phyrexian white mana, along with sacrificing 2 other artifacts and/or creatures, you can put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. And this takes away its biggest weakness, which is that creatures tend to be a little easier to remove than enchantments. Make it indestructible and you have a very difficult to kill Anointed Procession. I'm curious to see how many people run this over Anointed Procession, although I don't see a reason to put both in the same cube if you're running a 360. Nissa Ascended Animist. Nissa Ascended Animist is a brand new completed planeswalker that loves mono green. It costs 7 mana, unless you pay some Phyrexian mana, in which case it could cost less, and has some incredibly useful abilities that might just win you the game. Her +1 makes a token with power and toughness equal to her loyalty, which is going to be a pretty huge creature, an 8/8 if you actually cast her for the full mana cost. -1 is to destroy an artifact or enchantment, which is never something to be mad about having access to on a permanent. And then the -7, which you can activate right away if you pay the full 7 mana. It just wins you the game if you've been doing mono green correctly. It gives your creatures +1/+1 for each forest you control and trample until end of turn. It also encourages monocolored decks, which is probably not very common in most average cube drafts. So if you want to push your cubers in that direction, then it might be a pretty cool card to include. Canker Bloom. Canker Bloom is a new variant of Thrashing Brontodon. While Brontodon is a 3 mana 3/4, Canker Bloom is a 2 mana 3/2, so both are above rate. Canker Bloom can also destroy an artifact or enchantment for 1 mana, or proliferate. I think both cards serve their purpose well, and you should run one of them or a card that is very similar, basing your choice on your existing curve and obviously prioritizing the Canker Bloom if you can make use of the proliferate option. Glissa Sunslayer. It can always be hard to recommend multicolored cards because there's so few slots for them in most cubes, but oh boy, Glissa Sunslayer is pretty cool. She's an on-rate 3 mana 3/3 with quite a bit of extra text. First Strike and Death Touch is a pretty deadly combination in combat, can kill pretty much anything, and when she deals combat damage to a player, which she probably will since blocking is scary, she can have you draw a card and lose 1 life, or destroy an enchantment or remove 3 counters from a permanent. If nothing else, you can draw a card, but being able to remove things is also super useful. Basically, you can kill a creature in combat, or get rid of an enchantment, or maybe even a planeswalker after finally connecting with a player. Blazing Crescendo. Just to get a red card in this video's list, because this is the only one, I'm going to recommend a common combat trick that offers something pretty new and exciting. It's just shy of Infuriate on the first line, and on the second line, you get to Impulse Draw. What? So you can get some surprise damage in during combat or save one of your creatures, plus be able to play the top card of your library until the end of your next turn, not even the end of the current turn. And it says play, so you can play a land too. It won't be strong enough for every cube, but it's a great way to make a combat trick quite a lot more playable. I mean, look at the average cube list, how many combat tricks are there? This might be one of the most playable ones to ever be printed. Planar Disruption. Planar Disruption is an upgrade to both Arrest and Pacifism. Not necessarily common cube cards, but it's an effect that is generally useful. It can hit artifacts and planeswalkers in addition to creatures, and it prevents that creature from attacking, blocking, and activating abilities. And it does it all for just 2 mana. So it's a big upgrade if you're running either of those cards. It's also just a pretty decent removal spell, but it might be easier to just run some more Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile variants. A closer comparison might be Faith's Fetters without the life gain. So you're getting a very similar effect for 2 less mana and not gaining a life. So pretty dang good, am I right? Alright, those are 10 of my picks for the top cards for Cube from All Will Be One. Obviously you don't need to include all of these, but I think a few of them are pretty cool, unique, and undeniably powerful, and of course worth testing out. And if you have more specific cubes, there are plenty of wacky toys to play with when it comes to proliferate and counters and poison. So let me know in the comments what you'll be including in yours, and I'll see you in the next Masonzero MTG video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all later.